The last thing Lauren said to me before she walked out of our apartment for the final time was, "I can't keep pretending this is enough, Marcus." She wasn't yelling, that was the part that made it worse. She was calm, resigned, like she'd already grieved the relationship before she ever started packing. She was talking about our life, our one-bedroom apartment in Plaza Midwood, my 2016 Honda Civic with the check engine light that had been on for 3 months, my salary, $72,000 a year as a project manager at a mid-sized construction firm in Charlotte, the future she didn't think I was working toward. And the worst part was, I couldn't tell her she was wrong, not because she was right, but because I literally wasn't allowed to. 3 weeks earlier, I'd sat in a leather chair across from my family's estate attorney, and he'd told me something that would have changed everything about that conversation in our kitchen. But he'd also told me, very clearly, very legally, that I couldn't discuss it with anyone until probate was settled. So I stood there, and I let her go. Let me back up. My name is Marcus Calloway. I'm 29. And until about 8 months ago, I was just a guy with a pretty normal life. Good job, decent apartment, girlfriend I thought I was going to marry. The only complicated thing about me was my family, and even that didn't look complicated from the outside. My grandfather, Henry Calloway, was the kind of man people in Charlotte knew by reputation but not by sight. He started buying rental properties in the 70s with money he saved working second shift at a textile mill off Wilkinson Boulevard. One duplex became two. Two became a small apartment complex. By the time I was born, Calloway Properties owned and managed over 200 units across Mecklenburg County, plus a handful of commercial buildings uptown. But you'd never know it looking at him. Henry drove a 2003 Ford F-150 with rust spots on the passenger door. He wore the same 3 flannel shirts in rotation. He lived in a 3-bedroom ranch in Matthews that hadn't been updated since 1994. Same linoleum floor, same gold carpet, same Magnavox tube TV. His idea of a fancy dinner was the Texas Roadhouse on Independence Boulevard, and only if someone else was celebrating something. That wasn't an act, that was just who he was. He believed that money was a tool, not a trophy. He taught my dad the same thing. My dad, Richard, worked as a senior project director at Calloway Properties, basically running the day-to-day operations, but he drove a Camry and lived in a normal 4-bedroom split level in Mint Hill. I grew up thinking we were comfortable, middle class, maybe upper middle class on a good day. It wasn't until I was a sophomore at UNC Charlotte, majoring in construction management, that I pieced together the actual scale of what my grandfather had built. And even then, I didn't fully understand it. My dad and my Uncle Thomas, Henry's 2 sons, had a complicated relationship that shaped everything in our family. Thomas was 10 years younger than my dad, more ambitious in a flashier way. He wanted Henry to start developing luxury properties, partner with national builders, leverage the portfolio for bigger deals. He'd show up at family dinners with pitch decks and projections. Henry would listen, nod, and say, "Not interested." Thomas took it personally. He thought Henry was stubborn, old-fashioned, deliberately holding the company back. By the time I was in high school, Thomas had moved to Raleigh, started his own development firm, and barely spoke to the family. His son, my cousin Derek, was caught in the middle. Derek and I were close as kids. We'd spend weeks together in the summer at Henry's lake house on Lake Norman, fishing off the dock, riding 4-wheelers. But after Thomas left, I'd see Derek maybe once a year at Thanksgiving, and it was always stilted, like he was waiting for something. Thomas died in 2021, single-car accident on I-40 near Durham, fell asleep at the wheel coming back from a site visit. Derek was 27. It hit him the way you'd expect, hard, and in ways that surfaced months later. He started coming around more after that, showing up at Henry's on weekends, calling my dad. I thought he was reconnecting. In hindsight, I think he was positioning. I was the one who spent real time with Henry, not because anyone asked me to. Not because I was angling for anything. I just genuinely liked the old man. After I graduated and started working at Whitfield Construction, I'd still drive out to Matthews on Saturday mornings. Henry and I would drink instant coffee. He refused to buy a Keurig and drive around to his properties. He'd show me things, how to spot foundation settling by looking at door frames, how to read a lease agreement for the clauses that would actually matter in a dispute, how to talk to a tenant who was behind on rent so they felt heard instead of hunted. He never paid me, never offered, I never asked. I just liked being there. It felt important in a way I couldn't articulate at the time. My dad was the one who told me I needed to make my own way. Henry's got his philosophy. He said one afternoon when I asked about working for the family business, "You've got to build your own foundation before you can inherit someone else's." So I got a job at Whitfield, a mid-sized commercial construction firm off South Boulevard, and I worked. I liked it. I was good at it. I moved from assistant PM to project manager in 3 years. I was managing a $4.2 million renovation of a medical office building and on track for senior PM by 30. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. That's where I was when I met Lauren Maddox, 27. marketing coordinator at a firm called Brandenburg Partners in South End. We met at the trivia night at Petra's in Noda in the fall of 2022. A mutual friend, Chelsea, brought her to our team because we were short a person. Laura knew nothing about trivia, but she guessed the final Jeopardy question correctly, something about the Treaty of Ghent, and she celebrated like she'd won the World Series. I liked her immediately. She was funny, sharp, and had this way of cutting through my tendency to overthink everything. Where I'd deliberate, she'd decide. Where I'd hedge, she'd commit. It was attractive. It was also, eventually, the thing that broke us. We dated for a year before she moved in. The apartment was mine, 750 square feet in a complex off Central Avenue, $1,850 a month. She split rent and utilities. We fell into a rhythm that felt like a life being built. Grocery runs on Sunday, her shows on Tuesday and Thursday, my Saturday mornings with Henry. It worked, and for a while, it was good, really good. I'm not going to pretend the money tension came out of nowhere. Lauren never hid what she wanted. She wanted to own a home before 30. She wanted to travel, not backpack through Europe travel, but real trips, nice resorts, good restaurants. She wanted financial security. She'd grown up in a house where money was always tight. Her dad worked in warehouse logistics. Her mom was a part-time dental hygienist, and she'd made a promise to herself that she wouldn't live that way as an adult. There's nothing wrong with that. I wanted those things too. I just had a different timeline. The problem was that my timeline was invisible to her, and I couldn't explain why. Henry died on a Tuesday in March 14th. He was 84, heart failure, in his sleep at home. My dad found him the next morning when he didn't answer the phone. I got the call at 6:47 a.m. while I was getting ready for work. I remember sitting on the edge of the bathtub for 10 minutes after I hung up, just staring at the floor. I won't go deep into the grief. That's its own story. What matters here is what happened after. The funeral was at Pleasant Hill Methodist, the same church Henry had attended for 50 years. 200 people showed up. Tenants, contractors, people from the neighborhood. A woman named Mary Jenkins stood up and said Henry had let her stay in her apartment rent-free for 3 months after her husband died, and she never forgot it. That was the kind of man he was. At the reading of the will, which happened about 10 days after the funeral, my dad, Derek, and I sat in a conference room at a firm called Whitaker and Pine on Moorhead Street. The attorney was Gerald Mooney, old school, silver hair, half-moon glasses, must have been 70 himself. He'd been Henry's attorney for 40 years and handled every property transaction, every lease, every contract the man had ever signed. He explained that Henry had updated his will about 2 years prior. I knew I was named executor. Henry had told me that himself, casually, over lunch one afternoon at the Bojangles on Independence. "You're the one who will handle things when I'm gone," he'd said, like he was telling me the weather. I didn't think much of it at the time. What I didn't know was everything else. Gerald handed each of us a folder. He explained the distribution. To my dad, Richard, 15% of the estate, plus continued salary as project director at Callaway Properties for as long as he chose to work. To Derek, 15% held in a trust that would disburse in equal annual installments over 10 years. To me, 70%, including controlling interest in Callaway Properties, the real estate portfolio, the commercial buildings, the investment accounts, the foundation, everything operational. Gerald didn't put a dollar amount on it right then, but later, when I met with him privately the following week, he showed me the valuation. The estate, conservatively, was worth approximately $47 million. I sat in my car in the parking deck for 45 minutes after that meeting. I didn't call anyone, I just sat there. Derek didn't say a word to me after the reading. He took his folder, shook Gerald's hand, and walked out. My dad looked at me with this expression I still can't fully describe. Not jealousy, not even surprise. More like recognition. Like he'd always known this was how it would play out. "He chose you because you were the only one who showed up," my dad said quietly in the hallway outside the conference room. "Not for the money, just to be there. That's what mattered to him." Derek didn't see it that way. I found out later that he'd been meeting with Thomas's old business associates, talking about the family company like it was already his. He'd been telling people he was going to take over Callaway Properties. The will was a shock. He hired a lawyer within the month. A guy named Harmon Vetch from a firm in Raleigh, the kind of attorney who advertises on billboards. They filed a will contest alleging undue influence, claiming my dad and I had manipulated Henry. It was baseless. Henry's medical record showed no cognitive decline. Gerald's documentation was meticulous, and 2 independent witnesses had been present at the signing. But the contest meant the estate was tangled up in legal proceedings. And during that time, Gerald was very clear, no discussing the details of the estate with anyone outside the immediate family. No transfers, no purchases, no public announcements, nothing that could be used to challenge the distribution. So I went back to my life. Same apartment, same car, same job. Same girlfriend who was starting to look at me like I was standing still while everyone else was moving forward. The first real crack appeared in April, about a month after Henry died. Lauren wanted to talk about buying a house. Interest rates were still manageable, and she'd found a listing in Plaza Midwood, a 3-bedroom, 400 square feet, updated kitchen, fenced backyard, $385,000. She'd printed out the listing. She'd run the numbers on a yellow legal pad. If we combine savings and put down 10%, we're at $38,500, she said, tapping the pad. Our mortgage with taxes and insurance would be around $2,400. That's $550 more than we pay now, but we're building equity. It makes sense. She was right. It did make sense. And I had the money. Even before the estate, I had savings. But I also had this massive, invisible weight pressing down on me. I couldn't make a major financial commitment while the estate was in probate and Derek was contesting the will. Gerald had been explicit about that. Any unusual financial activity could be flagged and used as evidence that I was improperly benefiting from the estate before distribution was finalized. I don't think right now is the best time, I said. With everything going on. Everything going on? She looked at me. Marcus, your grandfather passed a month ago. I get that you're grieving, but this is about our future. We need to start planning, I know. I need a few more months to sort some things out. What things? There are things I'm dealing with, legal stuff, with the estate. She stared at me. What legal stuff? You've barely said anything about the estate. I didn't even know there was an estate. I'd walked right into it. It's just probate. It's complicated. She didn't push it, but I could see something shift in her face, like a door closing, just slightly. She picked up the yellow legal pad, folded it in half, and put it in a drawer. We didn't talk about buying a house again. May was worse. Lauren's college friend Jessica got engaged. The ring was a cushion-cut diamond on a platinum band that Jessica kept finding excuses to show people. Jess's fiancé, Brian, worked in investment banking at Wells Fargo, and they just closed on a house in Myers Park, a 4-bedroom craftsman with a screened porch and a yard big enough for the labradoodle they were already talking about getting. Lauren came home from the engagement party and didn't say anything for an hour. She sat on the couch and scrolled through photos on her phone. Then, while we were eating the stir-fry I'd made for dinner, she said, "Jess's house has a sunroom." I nodded. "That's nice. Her mortgage payment is less than our rent. Brian's bonus covered half the down payment." I didn't know if that was true. I didn't ask. I just kept eating. "Do you ever think about where we'll be in 5 years?" she asked. "Sometimes. What do you think about?" "I don't know. Working. Maybe a house." "Maybe. I don't know." "You don't know, Lauren. I can't. There are things I'm working through. I need time. You've been saying that for months." She was right. I had been. And every time I said it, I could feel the distance between us growing. At work, things were getting complicated too. My boss, Phil Wynn, had been good to me. He'd hired me straight out of UNC Charlotte, mentored me, given me real responsibility early. He was the kind of manager who remembered your wife's birthday and asked about your weekend. I respected him, but in May, a project came across his desk that he wanted me to manage, a renovation contract for a multi-unit residential property in Noda. The client was listed as Callaway Properties. I had to recuse myself. I walked into Phil's office and told him I had a conflict of interest, family connection to the client. He leaned back in his chair and looked at me like I'd grown a second head. "Since when does your family own property?" he asked. "I thought your granddad had a couple of rental houses." "He had more than a couple," I said. It's complicated." Phil reassigned the project to my coworker Tom Brady, not the quarterback, a different one, a guy 2 years ahead of me who'd been angling for the same senior PM track I was on. He was also the kind of person who made sure you knew he was competent, frequently and at volume. The Callaway project went well under Tom's management. The client, my dad essentially, was happy with the work. Phil was impressed, and then in June, when the senior PM position opened up, the one I'd been on track for, Phil gave it to Tom. He called me into his office on a Thursday afternoon. "I know you were expecting this," he said, "and I know you've had a rough few months, but I need consistency right now. You've been distracted, late on deliverables. I can't promote someone who isn't fully present." He wasn't wrong. Between the grief, the estate meetings with Gerald, the weight of what I knew and couldn't say, I was barely holding it together at work. I'd missed a deadline on the medical office project. I'd shown up late twice in 1 week. Tom had been picking up my slack, and Phil had noticed. I came home that night and Lauren could tell something was wrong. I told her I didn't get the promotion. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Did you fight for it?" Not really. Phil made his decision. Of course he did, because you didn't push back. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't have to. The silence said it. June turned into July. Lauren and I were spending more and more evenings in separate rooms. She'd scroll Zillow on her phone in the bedroom. I'd sit in the living room and stare at the TV without watching it. We were polite, we were functional, but we weren't really together anymore. We were two people sharing a lease and a grocery list. The night she left, it was a Wednesday, July 19th. I'd gotten home late from a meeting with Gerald about Derek's will contest, which had just been dismissed that afternoon finally, and I was exhausted. I walked into the apartment and Lauren was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of wine. She looked like she'd been waiting. "Sit down," she said. I sat. "I love you," she said. "I need you to know that. I'm not doing this because I don't love you. I'm doing this because I can't see where we're going." I opened my mouth to say something, but she held up her hand. "You won't talk about buying a house. You won't talk about the future. You got passed over for a promotion and you didn't even seem upset. You come home late 2 nights a week and you won't tell me where you've been. And I keep thinking, maybe he's just not that ambitious. Maybe this is it. Maybe this is the life and I'm supposed to be okay with it." I'm not, Lauren. It's not that I'm not ambitious. There are things I can't. Can't what? Can't tell me. That's the problem, Marcus. I'm supposed to build a life with someone who won't let me in. I don't even know what's going on with you. Your grandfather dies and you barely talk about it. You're gone 2 nights a week and you won't say where. You won't plan anything. You won't commit to anything. I feel like I'm dating a stranger. She was right. About all of it. She was right that I was shutting her out. She was right that I was being evasive. She was right that from where she stood, I looked like someone who had given up. What she was wrong about was the reason, but I couldn't give her the reason. Gerald's warning echoed in my head, no discussing the estate with anyone outside the immediate family. If word gets out before probate is fully settled, it could complicate the distribution, especially with Derek contesting. I know what you're thinking. I could have told her something, anything. I could have said, my family has money, and I'm dealing with a complicated inheritance. I could have said that without revealing dollar amounts or specific terms. I know that now. I knew it then even. But in the moment, all I could hear was Gerald's voice, and all I could feel was the weight of Henry's trust. I didn't want to mess this up. I didn't want to be the reason the estate fell apart, so I said nothing. Lauren packed 2 suitcases. She called her sister Megan to come pick her up. She stood in the doorway of our bedroom, the room we'd shared for a year, and she said, "I can't keep pretending this is enough, Marcus." And then she was gone. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the empty side of the closet where her clothes had been. The hangers were still spaced apart, like they remembered her shirts. I thought about calling Gerald and asking if the restriction had lifted. I thought about calling Lauren and telling her everything. But even though Derek's contest had been dismissed that afternoon, the estate still wasn't fully settled. Gerald had said it would be at least another few weeks before all the paperwork was finalized. So I didn't call her. I sat there, and I let the silence fill the apartment like water rising in a room. 2 weeks after Lauren left, Gerald called me. The estate was clear. Probate was settled. Derek's contest was dismissed with prejudice. The assets were mine to assume. I drove to Gerald's office and signed what felt like 100 documents: transfer of property titles, assignment of corporate shares, foundation board resolutions, trust documents, tax filings. Then I drove to Callaway Properties headquarters, a modest 2-story office building off Monroe Road that I'd been to 100 times, but had never once thought of as mine, and sat in Henry's office. His desk was still covered in his things: a coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Fisherman," a framed photo of my grandmother who died in 2012, a stack of tenant files with handwritten notes in the margins. A calendar still turned to March. I didn't feel rich. I felt like I'd been handed a responsibility I hadn't asked for by a man who trusted me with his life's work, and the person I wanted to share it with was gone. My best friend, Jake Morrison, was the only person outside the family who knew. He'd known about Henry's wealth for years. He'd been to some of the properties with me on Saturdays. He'd seen the scope of the portfolio. He'd put 2 and 2 together. I called him the night after I signed everything. "You told her yet?" he asked. She left. Silence. Then, when? 2 weeks ago. "And you couldn't tell her because?" Gerald said not to. "During probate, with Derek contesting." Jake's voice had that tone, the one where he was about to tell me something I didn't want to hear. "You know there's a difference between don't discuss the estates and don't tell your girlfriend your family has money, right? You could have told her something. Anything. You didn't have to give her the valuation." He was right. I knew he was right. I'd known it even as I was doing it. I'd hidden behind Gerald's legal advice because it was easier than having the conversation. Easier than explaining that my family had money and I chose not to use it. Easier than confronting the fact that my silence was hurting the person I loved. But being right doesn't fix what's broken. The next few months were a blur of transition. I stepped into the role of chairman at Callaway Properties. I kept my job at Whitfield, at least for a while, because I wasn't ready to leave the life I'd built. My dad stayed on as project director. We had a long conversation about the future of the company, about Henry's vision, about what mattered. Henry had always believed in affordable housing, not as a charity project, but as a business model that worked. He kept rents below market rate because he believed stable tenants made for stable properties. He reinvested profits into maintenance and improvements instead of flashy acquisitions. He knew his tenants by name. He'd show up at properties with a toolbox and fix a leaky faucet himself if the maintenance guy was busy. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked, and I wanted to honor that. Derek and I didn't speak for 2 months after the will reading. Then, in September, he called me, not to apologize. Derek didn't apologize, but to talk. We met at a Waffle House in Concord, halfway between Charlotte and Raleigh. He was thinner than I remembered, tired looking. "I'm not going to pretend I'm okay with this," he said, pushing his hash browns around the plate. "I'm not. Dad spent his whole life trying to prove something to Grandpa, and Grandpa shut him out. And then Grandpa shut me out too. I was his grandson too." "I know," I said. "Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you got everything and I got a consolation prize." "Derek, you got 15% of a $47 million estate. That's not a consolation prize. It's not about the money," he said it forcefully and then paused. "Okay, it's a little about the money, but it's also about what it means. He chose you. He didn't choose me, and I've got to live with that." I didn't know what to say, because he was right. Henry had chosen me, and no amount of money could make that feel fair to Derek. We didn't hug it out. We didn't resolve anything, but we talked. And that was something. The Callaway Foundation, Henry's charitable arm, had been running for 15 years. It funded scholarships for kids from the neighborhoods where Henry's properties were located. It sponsored after-school programs and a food pantry at Pleasant Hill Methodist. It was quiet, unglamorous work, and it was the part of Henry's legacy I was most proud to inherit. The Foundation's annual gala was scheduled for October 21st. It was held at the Ritz-Carlton in Uptown Charlotte. I'd been to it twice before, as Henry's guest, sitting at his table clapping politely during the speeches. But this year was different. This year, I was the one giving the opening remarks. This year, I was the chairman. I almost didn't go. The thought of standing up in front of 300 people and being introduced as the head of the Callaway family made me feel like a fraud. I hadn't earned this. I'd just been born into it. I'd just shown up on Saturdays, but my dad talked me into it. "Henry chose you," he said. "Don't make him look wrong." So I went. I wore a navy suit I'd bought off the rack at Belk at South Park Mall, $340, on sale from $480. I wasn't about to start spending crazy money on clothes. I got to the Ritz at 6,003 p.m. The ballroom was set up with round tables, white linens, floral centerpieces with sunflowers, Henry's favorite. The guest list was a mix of city council members, business leaders, foundation donors, and community partners. About 280 people. My dad was there with my mom, Linda. She was wearing a green dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion, the first new dress she'd bought in 2 years. They were proud. I could see it in the way my mom kept touching my arm, the way my dad nodded at people and said, "Have you met my son? He's the new chairman." The evening started normally enough. Cocktails and hors d'oeuvres in the pre-function area. Small talk. I shook hands with a city councilman named David Howard. I talked to a woman named Patricia Gomez who ran a nonprofit called Bright Path that the foundation funded. She told me their after-school program had grown 40% in the last year and they needed more space. I wrote a mental note to follow up. I was nervous, but I was managing. Then, at about 7,005, I was standing near the bar holding a club soda and I saw her, Lauren. She was across the room, near the entrance to the ballroom, holding a clipboard and wearing an earpiece. She was wearing a black dress, work attire, functional, not gala attire. She had a lanyard around her neck with a logo on it. I recognized the logo Event Logix, a Charlotte-based company that provided on-site coordination and logistics for large events. She was working. She was staff. My stomach dropped. Of course she was here. Event Logix handled corporate events at the Ritz. It was her job. She'd probably been assigned to this gala weeks ago, not knowing who the new chairman was, not knowing I'd be the one standing at the podium tonight. She hadn't seen me yet. She was talking to one of the hotel's catering managers, pointing at something on her clipboard, adjusting the earpiece. I had about 30 seconds to decide what to do. I didn't decide anything, because before I could move, the MC, a local news anchor named Brigida Mack from WSOC, took the stage and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our opening remarks will begin shortly. And I'd like to introduce this year's chairman of the Callaway Foundation, Henry Callaway's grandson, Marcus Callaway." My name echoed through the ballroom sound system. People clapped. I set my club soda on the bar and walked toward the stage, and that's when Lauren looked up. I watched it happen in slow motion. The confusion first, Marcus? What was I doing here? Then the recognition spreading across her face like a crack in glass. Callaway, the name on the foundation, the name on the properties, the name she lived with for 2 years without knowing what it meant. Then something else, something that looked like the ground had opened up under her feet. I reached the stage. I shook Brigida's hand. I turned to the microphone. Lauren was still standing near the entrance, clipboard pressed against her chest, staring at me. I gave my remarks. I don't remember most of what I said. I know I talked about Henry. I know I talked about the foundation's work, the 18 scholarship recipients in the room, the food pantry that served 400 families a month, the new mentorship program we were launching. I know I quoted Henry directly. "Money's only worth what it builds." People clapped. I sat down. My mom squeezed my hand under the table. During dinner, I could see Lauren moving around the perimeter of the room, doing her job. checking on tables, coordinating with catering staff, whispering into her earpiece. She was professional. She didn't come near my table. She didn't look in my direction again, but I knew it was coming, and it did. At about 9:30, the formal part of the evening was winding down. The DJ had started playing soft jazz. People were mingling, heading to the bar, saying their goodnights. I stepped out into the hallway near the restrooms to get some air. I needed a minute. The weight of the evening, the speech, the people, the constant explaining of who I was now was pressing on me. Lauren was there. She was leaning against the wall, looking at her phone. She looked up when she heard my footsteps. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The muffled sound of jazz drifted through the ballroom doors. Then, Marcus. "Yeah, Callaway Foundation, Callaway Properties." She said it flatly, like she was reading evidence. "Your grandfather, the real estate." "Yeah, how much?" I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was such a Lauren question. Direct, no pretense, no circling. "At the time you left, about 47 million. Probably more now." She closed her eyes. Her hand went to her forehead. "Oh my God, Lauren, you couldn't tell me?" "You couldn't," I asked you. "I literally sat at that table and asked you what was going on. I begged you to talk to me, and you let me think you were?" "I couldn't, legally. The estate was in probate. My cousin was contesting the will. My attorney told me not to discuss it with anyone outside the family." She stared at me. "Anyone? I was your girlfriend, Marcus. I wasn't anyone. I was the person you were supposed to build a life with."
"You're right."
"You weren't anyone, and I should have found a way to tell you something. Anything. I didn't handle it right. I know that." She was quiet for a long time. I could hear her breathing. The jazz music shifted to something slower. "Would it have changed things?" she asked. "If I'd known? I don't know. Maybe. Probably. But that's not Lauren. You left because you thought I had no plan. I had a plan. I just couldn't show it to you. And by the time I could, you were already gone." "Because you let me believe there was nothing." Her voice cracked. Not loud, just cracked, like a branch under too much snow. "Do you know how that felt? Watching Jess and Brian buy a house in Myers Park, watching Chelsea get promoted, watching everyone around me move forward with their lives while my boyfriend couldn't even tell me where he was going 2 nights a week. I thought you were depressed. I thought you'd given up. I know what you thought, and from where you were standing, you were right to think it." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "So what now? You're rich and I'm working your gala for 22 an hour and we just, what? Move on? I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm not angry. I don't think you're a bad person for leaving. You made a decision based on what you knew. I made a decision, a bad one, to hide things from you. We both did what we did. That's very mature and it makes me want to scream." I almost smiled. She almost smiled. Neither of us did. She took a breath, straightened up, put her professional face back on, the one I'd seen her use at client meetings, the one that said, "I have this under control. I need to get back to work, okay? Marcus," she paused, half turned back toward the ballroom. "I'm sorry for what I said, for leaving the way I did. I'm not sorry for wanting more, but I'm sorry for how I handled it. I'm sorry too, for all of it." She nodded. Then she waltzed back into the ballroom. I watched her go. She didn't look back. I stayed in the hallway for a few more minutes. Then I went back inside, said my goodnights to the remaining guests, hugged my mom, shook my dad's hand, and drove home to my apartment, the same one-bedroom in Plaza Midwood where Lauren had packed her bags 6 months earlier. I didn't call her. She didn't call me. That was October. It's March now. Here's where things stand. I left Whitfield Construction in January. Phil was understanding, more than I deserved, honestly. He shook my hand and said, "I always knew you had something else going on. I just didn't know what. I'm now full-time at Callaway Properties, working alongside my dad. We're developing a new affordable housing complex in West Charlotte, 48 units, mixed income, with a community center on the ground floor. We broke ground last month. Henry would have loved it." Derek and I eventually found a version of normal. It took a while, a lot of awkward family dinners and one very loud argument at my parents' house on Christmas Eve, where Derek said some things he probably meant and I said some things I definitely meant. But he's come around, mostly. He's using his trust distributions to start a property management company in Raleigh. He's good at it. He's got Thomas's ambition, but he's learning slowly that ambition doesn't have to mean resentment. The foundation is doing well. We funded 22 scholarships this year, up from 18 last year. I started a mentorship program that pairs scholarship recipients with professionals in their fields, construction, finance, healthcare, whatever they're interested in. It's small, but it's growing. As for me and Lauren, we don't talk. I heard through Chelsea that she got a promotion at Event Logics, senior event coordinator. She's doing well. I hope she is. I don't have any ill will toward her. She wanted security. She wanted a partner who let her in. I couldn't give her the second thing and she didn't know I could give her the first. I started seeing someone in January. Her name is Priya Sharma. She's 28, a program coordinator at Bright Path, Patricia Gomez's nonprofit. We met at a community meeting about the West Charlotte project. She's sharp, she's direct, and she doesn't care about the money, not because she's noble, but because she genuinely cares more about the work. She knew about the Callaway name before she knew me, and when she found out I was the Callaway, she just shrugged and said, "Cool, can you still help me move these chairs?" I told her about Lauren. She listened. She didn't judge either of us. She just said, "Sounds like you both did your best with bad information. That's about right." I think about Henry a lot. I think about what he would have said about all this. Probably something like, "Money doesn't fix stupid, Marcus. You were stupid. Learn from it." And then he'd hand me a wrench and tell me the bathroom faucet in Unit 14B was leaking. He was right about most things. I'm trying to be right about the things he trusted me with. Anyway, that's my story. I'm not looking for sympathy. I made mistakes. Lauren made mistakes. We were two people who loved each other and couldn't figure out how to be honest. That's not a tragedy. That's just life. But I'll tell you one thing. If I could go back to that Wednesday night in July, to the kitchen table, the glass of wine, the woman I loved telling me she couldn't see where we were going, I wouldn't tell her about the money. I'd tell her the truth, that I was scared, that I was hiding behind legal advice because I didn't know how to be vulnerable, that I loved her and I was shutting her out and I knew it and I was doing it anyway, because the money didn't matter. What mattered was that I had the chance to let her in and I chose not to, and no inheritance, no matter how large, can fix that.